While I was lying in the ICU, too weak to speak, my daughter drained $2.2 million from my account and whispered, "It's better this way." I heard every word. I felt the tug on my oxygen line. I gave her my whole life, and she gave me nothing but silence and a hand on the cord that kept me alive. But someone else was watching, and when the front door flew open, everything changed. What happens when a quiet mother sets her final trap? I heard her voice before I felt her hand. My daughter stood at the foot of my bed in the ICU, her arms crossed, her tone colder than the machines humming around me. She said it softly, like she didn't think I was awake. "We took it all. The money's gone. It's better this way." My chest rose and fell with shallow effort. I couldn't speak, not with the oxygen mask sealed tight across my face. But my eyes moved. I saw her. I saw the shape of her lips form those words. Then I felt the weight of her hand on the oxygen line. It wasn't firm. Not yet. But it was there. A silent threat dressed as a farewell. Renee was next to her. My daughter-in-law. Younger, sharper, quieter. But her smile said enough. It wasn't grief. It was relief. And it sliced deeper than anything else in the room. I'd spent my life saving that money. 2.2 million. I never bragged. I never took a vacation longer than a weekend. That money wasn't for show. It was meant to protect me from exactly this. I gave them everything. Raised Diana without help. Helped cover Renee's student debt. Co-signed their first mortgage. And now, standing over me, they acted like I was a burden they'd already buried. The monitors beeped steady. My pulse gave me away. Diana leaned closer, her perfume a smell I used to like. "Not anymore." She whispered, "Rest now. You won't remember any of this." But I did. I remember everything. They turned to go. Their heels echoed down the hall like punctuation. But just as the door swung, I caught the sound I didn't expect. A shuffle. Then a click. Then the alarm. It started as a soft chime, something only nurses would notice. But I knew that sound. It meant someone had triggered the security override tied to the ICU protocols. And I knew exactly who had set it up. Linda, my best friend, my only real friend. She was the one who helped me set it all up last year. The alert system, the financial flags, the account locks, the backup trustee clause in case something happened. She was the one who noticed when the withdrawals started 3 hours ago. She didn't call me. She called the police. She called Michael. Michael. My son. My quiet one. He hadn't spoken to Diana in months, not since their last argument over what she called my hoarding tendencies. I remembered his words clearly. "If anything ever happens to you, Mum, I won't be the one standing there with excuses. I'll be standing there with answers." And suddenly there he was. The door slammed open, hard, with purpose. Michael walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers and a man in plain clothes I didn't recognize. Renee froze mid-step. Diana spun around, her face pale. The man in plain clothes spoke first. His badge came out smooth. His voice was steady, no drama, just fact. "I'm with Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak to Diana Caraway and Renee Wallace regarding unauthorized transfers exceeding federal thresholds." Diana stuttered. Renee said nothing. Michael didn't speak either. He walked straight to my bedside, his eyes on mine. He didn't touch the oxygen line. He touched my hand. And that's when the monitor showed it. My heart rate jumped. It was the first time in 3 hours I felt something like safety. The detective began reading rights. Renee whispered something about a misunderstanding. Diana raised her voice. But the words fell apart. The police didn't care. They were here to serve process. Linda arrived seconds later. She had a folder in her hand, thick and labeled. She walked straight to the detective, handed it over, then turned to me. Her eyes were steady. She gave me the smallest nod. I blinked once. She understood. The detective opened the folder and pulled out transaction logs, matched signatures, and printed emails. He asked Diana if she recognized the authorization forms. She denied them. Then he pulled up the bank camera stills. Diana, Renee, sitting side by side at the bank, signing documents, laughing, not once looking at the paperwork. Renee folded first. Her voice cracked. She said she didn't know it was illegal, that it was Diana's idea. Diana turned to her, stunned, then furious. Michael raised his voice, calm but sharp. You stole from her, and you tried to kill her. Renee broke. Diana lashed out. But the officers were already moving. You know, I never thought it would end like this. I thought if I ever lost control of my life, it'd be because of my age, my health, not because of my own blood. But here's the thing. I had a plan. I had Linda. I had Michael. And I had the one thing they underestimated. Time. I used every quiet moment of my later years to build a wall they didn't see coming. And now, standing here, dragged into the light, they finally realized. They never had control. Not really. I did. And now they would lose everything they thought they won. This is just the beginning. Stay with me. I stayed awake through all of it. The cuffs, the silence that followed, the sudden chaos inside that cold, white room. There's something sobering about watching your daughter and your daughter-in-law escorted away by people in uniform while you lie in bed with tubes in your arms. Linda never looked at them. She never needed to. She had already done what needed doing. Michael stepped out for a moment to speak with the detective in private. From my bed, I watched Renee glance back, maybe hoping for someone to defend her. Diana kept her chin up, pretending none of it mattered, but her shoulders told another story. When the room finally cleared, Linda came to my side. You were right, she said softly. They moved the money at 3:17 p.m. today. It was a coordinated transfer, broken into 4 sub-amounts to avoid federal reporting. The system flagged it. So did I. I blinked. Once. I couldn't thank her. Not with words. But we had known each other long enough to understand things without saying them. She reached into her bag and pulled out another folder, this one thicker, labeled in her handwriting. It held everything I had ever asked her to prepare. Emergency protocols, transaction history, bank camera screenshots, even a backup key to the trust account. I had set the trust up 3 years ago, quietly, legally. It was ironclad, with one clause that mattered more than any other. If someone accessed the primary account without my consent, or attempted to use a falsified signature, the entire sum would be frozen, and a fraud investigation would launch automatically. Linda had helped me design it, not as revenge, but as insurance. I never wanted to believe I'd have to use it, but that folder in her hand said otherwise. Michael returned with a set of documents from the officers. He placed them gently on the rolling tray beside my bed. They're pressing charges tonight: fraud, attempted murder, identity theft, and the trust is holding. You're protected. His voice didn't shake, but I saw the tension in his jaw. My boy had spent years biting his tongue while Diana played puppet master with the family name. Now he stood at the edge of her undoing, and he didn't flinch. He pulled a chair next to me and sat, fingers clasped. I thought he might say more, but he didn't. He just sat with me, like he used to when he was a kid and I was too tired to talk after work. He never needed words then either. Outside, the hallway buzzed with activity. I could hear the detective updating someone on the phone, voices clipped, purposeful. Somewhere down the corridor, Renee cried. Not the quiet cry of someone who regrets, the wild, shaking cry of someone caught too late. Linda stepped away to make copies. Michael remained by my side. I could feel something heavy shifting in the air, something final. When the nurse came in to check my vitals, she paused. It was Abigail. Her hands were steady, but her eyes held questions she didn't ask. She adjusted the line, reset the monitors, then looked down at me. "I saw what happened," she said softly. "I didn't know what to do at first, but I saw, and I told them. I hope that was right." I wanted to reach for her hand. My fingers barely twitched. But she saw it. She smiled, just a little, nodded once, then slipped out of the room. After she left, I stared up at the ceiling. The lights above buzzed faintly, like old wires humming secrets. My heart was tired, but my mind had never been sharper. They really thought I wouldn't wake up. They really thought they could win. I closed my eyes for a moment. Behind the lids, I saw my life in sharp pieces. Long nights working double shifts, grocery bills paid with coins, my hands washing their clothes when they were small, my silence through every selfish insult, every dismissal, every eye roll when I said no. They didn't just take the money, they tried to erase the person I had always been. And now, thanks to Linda, to Michael, to the cameras, to the quiet nurse who didn't turn away, they couldn't hide from what they'd done. Not anymore. Michael stood and gently tucked the folder into my bedside drawer. He looked down at me and spoke just loud enough to hear. "Rest now. You've earned that much." But I knew I wouldn't sleep. Not yet. There was still more to do. They had started a war. They didn't know I had already won. The morning after the arrests, the hospital staff avoided my room more than usual. I noticed it right away. No small talk, no side glances. They were quiet, professional, efficient. But every movement carried weight. They knew what had happened. And now they didn't know what to say to the woman who had been left for dead by her own family. I didn't need their words. I only needed what was coming next. Michael arrived before 8, still in yesterday's clothes. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He carried a laptop and 2 phones. He set them down beside my bed like a soldier unloading gear. "They want a statement," he said. "News outlets are already calling the precinct. Someone from the hospital must have leaked it. You're the story now." I blinked once. Slow. Michael didn't ask if I wanted the attention. He knew. I hadn't lived 70 years just to be erased in a quiet hospital bed. He opened the laptop, pulled up a video clip. The security footage. Still frames at first. Then motion. Diana and Renee sitting at the bank, their expression careless, casual. No hint of pressure, just comfort. Confidence. The same kind of confidence that comes from getting away with things for too long. Then the signature line appeared on screen. My name, but not my hand. Linda had matched it line by line against real samples. The loops were too wide. The slant was off. The ink bled in places mine never did. A forgery, but not even a good one. Michael turned the laptop toward me. "Detective Harris wants to present this at a press conference," he said. "He asked if we had your permission. I told him if anyone deserves to hold the microphone, it's you." I nodded. There would be no more hiding. Not for me, and not for them. Later that afternoon, the press set up outside the hospital. Nothing dramatic. Just 2 camera crews, 1 radio reporter, and a small group of curious bystanders. It wasn't the spectacle some might expect, but it was enough. Detective Harris stood behind a podium, calm and direct. He gave a timeline of events: the withdrawal, the attempted removal of life support, the fraud, the arrest. He didn't use names. He didn't need to. Then came the footage. The screen behind him lit up. Diana's face, Renee's, the laughter, the pens, the signatures, the timestamp, the bank branch logo. It played twice. Reporters didn't shout. They just stared. The silence that followed was louder than any headline. Inside my room, Linda sat across from me, watching the feed on her tablet. "They always thought they were smarter than you," she said quietly. "Always thought they could do it better, faster, slicker. But they forgot who taught them to survive in the first place." Michael stood in the corner, arms folded. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was just watching the truth take root in the public eye. Watching everything his sister and sister-in-law built unravel on screen. The hospital administrator stopped by around 6. He didn't stay long. He offered polite words, careful language, said the facility had initiated an internal review, that Abigail's statement had been verified, that the hospital would be cooperating fully with law enforcement, and that if I needed anything, anything at all, his office was open. I didn't blink. I just listened. He left quickly. A nurse came in soon after. Not Abigail. Another one. Younger. Nervous. She checked my chart, adjusted a setting, whispered something soft about being sorry. But I wasn't the one who needed to apologize. I was the one who survived. That evening, Michael returned with more documents. His wife had dropped off clean clothes and a stack of mail from my house. He placed a letter in my hand. I turned it over. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. Diana. Michael said it arrived that morning, hand-delivered to the mailbox. No postage, no envelope. He hadn't opened it. He left the room to give me space. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even denial. It was a list. A list of all the things she believed I owed her. The hours I didn't spend with her when she was little. The choices I made that didn't center her. The boundaries I set that she called punishments. She ended with a line that stuck in my throat. "You made me hard. Now you get to see how hard I can be." I let the paper fall to the floor. That wasn't regret. That was warning. She still thought this was a fight she could win. But it wasn't a fight anymore. It was a reckoning. Michael came back in and saw the letter on the tile. He didn't ask. He didn't touch it. He just looked at me, and I gave him the smallest nod. The next day, the press released the audio, the one from the ICU hallway, Diana's voice, Renee's whisper, the words they spoke before they thought anyone was listening. "Let's just say goodbye and be done with it. She won't even feel it." Those were the words, and they were recorded, public, forever. There was no coming back from that. By the end of the week, both Diana and Renee had lost their jobs. Their legal counsel released a statement saying they denied all intent to harm, that it was a misunderstanding, a family matter. But the cameras said otherwise, and so did the law, and so did I. They didn't just try to end me, they tried to erase me. And now, every piece of what they did was being stitched back together, not just as evidence, but as history. I was still here, breathing, watching, remembering. And I wasn't finished yet. By the third day, the story was everywhere. Not just local news, not just daytime radio, National outlets picked it up. The headline was short: Elderly mother targeted by daughter and daughter-in-law for $2 million inheritance. The photo they used was an old one of me and Michael. I looked thinner now, but my face was the same. It didn't matter what I looked like. What mattered was that people finally saw what they did. At first, Diana's lawyer tried to manage the damage. He issued a statement calling it a family misunderstanding, said the withdrawal was authorized, that the footage had no sound, that no one touched the oxygen line. But that only made it worse, because then they played the audio. The hospital confirmed the recordings, nurses signed sworn statements. Abigail gave hers without hesitation. Every word they thought no one heard was now fully public. Diana's voice was unmistakable. Renee's laugh was sharp and careless. The lawyer dropped out the next morning. That same day, Diana lost her position at the investment firm. They released a single-line press note. The company holds its employees to the highest ethical standards. Renee's hospital board seat was revoked by unanimous vote. Their names were attached to disgrace. Not tragedy, not scandal, just disgrace. Michael showed me the footage of Diana leaving her office. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Cameras flashed. She covered her face with a scarf like a celebrity with something to hide. Renee never left the house after that, at least not through the front door. But the real collapse didn't happen on TV. It happened at the courthouse. Linda and I had prepared the trust documents years ago, quietly. Every clause checked, every signature verified. It was meant to protect, not punish. But as soon as Diana forged her way into that account, it triggered everything. The investigation launched itself. The trust fund held more than money. It held all my medical directives. It outlined the legal authority of who could speak for me and who couldn't. And once the fraud was detected, it legally stripped Diana and Renee of all access. Not just to funds, but to decisions, to the house, to any remaining assets with my name on them. The bank account was just the start. Linda had anticipated what I couldn't bring myself to say out loud, that they wouldn't just take the money, they would take the voice, the right to speak for me if I couldn't. They almost succeeded. But the paper trail did not lie. The federal report showed attempts to split the transfer across multiple dummy accounts, timed within minutes of each other. The goal was to avoid mandatory banking alerts. But even that tactic was decades old. Diana had assumed the system wouldn't notice, or that no one would dig. She forgot who raised her. She forgot I worked 2 jobs while studying trust law at night, just to keep the roof over her head. The prosecutors moved quickly. Fraud, identity theft, attempted medical interference. The charges stacked like bricks. Renee took a deal first. She admitted to assisting in the transfer, knowingly signing falsified documents, and being present during the attempt to remove life support. Her plea spared her the worst of it. But it came with a price. She had to testify. Against Diana. The trial date was set before the week ended. They offered Diana a plea bargain too. Lesser charges, probation, restitution. She refused. She wanted to fight. She thought she still had power. She had none. When the financial records came in from the Cayman accounts, it sealed everything. Hidden funds traced back to Diana, dummy companies, shell transfers. It painted the full picture. And the picture was damning. Michael sat beside me each morning with updates. He never gloated. He just told me what I needed to know. And each day, as Diana's walls crumbled, I said less and less. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because silence had finally become the loudest answer. One morning, Linda arrived with a final folder. She laid it gently on my lap and said, "It's done." I opened it slowly. Inside were the amended documents, all property transferred to a new trust, excluding all immediate heirs except Michael. The clause that allowed for reinstatement of Diana or Renee had been voided, permanently. I looked up at Linda. She nodded once. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. The headlines faded after a week. Another scandal took over the cycle. Something political. Something messy. But for me, it was never about the headlines. It was about watching the ground fall out from under those who thought I was too weak to stand. Abigail stopped by that afternoon. She looked calmer, more confident. She said she had transferred to another ward, less intense. But she wanted me to know something. "What you did," she said. "It reminded me that people pay attention, that silence isn't the same as weakness." I didn't speak, just pressed her hand. The days passed quieter after that. I no longer needed to defend myself. The truth had done that for me, publicly, legally, personally. Diana tried once more to send a message through Michael. A note. Apologizing, sort of. Blaming stress, citing misunderstandings, saying she never wanted it to go this far. I didn't read it. I asked Michael to place it in the same folder as the trust paperwork. Let it sit there. Let it rot with the evidence. Renee never reached out again. Her name was no longer on anything. She was no longer married. Her husband filed divorce days after her arrest. It was done. They weren't just removed from my life. They had removed themselves. And now the damage they thought they buried came crashing back on them. Publicly, legally, permanently. This wasn't an ending. This was the reckoning they wrote themselves into. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the knock came. Not the firm kind that warned of uniforms or urgency. This one was softer, hesitant, almost polite. Michael stood near the window and gave me a glance. Not asking, just waiting. I nodded. He stepped out and opened the door. I could hear her voice before I saw her. Diana. It had been weeks. Long enough for the noise to die down in the press. Long enough for the lawyers to settle into the mechanics of what came next. Long enough for everyone but her to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a fracture. She stepped into the room slowly, as if afraid the floor might shift beneath her. Her posture was different, shoulders tight, arms locked to her sides, lips pressed together in a line that used to be a smile. Michael left without a word. The door clicked shut behind him. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes moved around the room like she was memorizing the way it looked, or maybe stalling for what to say. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't invite her closer. I let her feel the distance she had created. Finally, she spoke. "I just wanted to say something in person." I stayed silent. She took that as permission. She said things I expected. That she never meant for it to go this far. That it got out of control. That she made a mistake. That Renee pushed her. That I had always loved Michael more. That the money was just sitting there. That she thought she was protecting the family. Her voice cracked once. She didn't cry. She just waited. I let the silence return between us before I responded. My throat was dry, but my words were steady. "You didn't just try to take money. You tried to erase me." Her face tensed. She looked down, then back up. There was a flicker of something familiar in her expression. Not guilt, not remorse, just recognition, like she finally understood that I had seen through everything. "I raised you," I said slowly. "I covered your rent, paid your tuition. I stood in court with you when your first husband left. I let you back in my house when you had nowhere else to go, and you thanked me by stealing the only thing I had left to protect myself." She started to speak. but I lifted my hand. The room went quiet again. "I'm not here to fix you," I said. "That's over. You will face the law. You will face what people now know about you. And you will carry that weight alone." Her chin dropped. Her fingers twisted the strap of her bag. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not just physically, but somehow less formed, less certain, like the shell she'd built was cracking from the inside. "I don't hate you," I said. "I've never hated you. That would be giving you too much space inside me. But I won't save you from what you chose, and I won't soften the truth for anyone." She looked up, eyes searching. I could feel the silence stretching between us again. This time it didn't hurt. This time it held my boundaries, not my wounds. She took a step back, then another. "You always made me feel like I was never enough," she whispered. "And you made me feel like I was never real," I said. She paused, as if trying to understand. "I gave birth to you," I said. "But somewhere along the way, you chose something else. Power, control, a version of love that looked more like a transaction than a relationship. And now you've spent everything you had trying to win a war I never started." She nodded once. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. I stood slowly, careful of the IV line still taped to my arm. My body wasn't strong yet, but I was upright. And she saw that. She saw I hadn't been buried. "You will walk out of this room," I said, "and you will remember today for the rest of your life, because this is the day your mother told you she survived you." Her lips parted, then closed again. She turned without another word and walked to the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle. She didn't look back. When the door closed behind her, I exhaled. Michael came in a few minutes later. He didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. He looked at my face, then gently picked up the folder that held the final trust papers. He added a sheet. It was a notarized statement, signed by me the day before. It declared that under no circumstances would Diana be reinstated into any estate, any medical directive, or any legal consideration tied to my name. It was final. It wasn't written in anger. It was written in clarity. There is a kind of power in knowing who you are, after someone has tried to reduce you. A kind of stillness that comes from naming what was done and choosing not to carry it further. I didn't hate my daughter, but I no longer defended her. I no longer explained her. I no longer offered her the right to rewrite our story. She had written her chapter, and now I had written mine. The quiet came in slowly, not all at once. It started with the silence of my phone, no more calls from lawyers or hospital administrators. Then the emails stopped. Then the news stopped covering it. The camera crews that had hovered outside the building disappeared. The nurses on rotation no longer paused outside my door to whisper. There were no more court hearings to prepare for, no more headlines, no more decisions to sign under pressure. Just breath. Just the space to think without watching my back. I stayed in recovery for another week. The doctors wanted to be sure the stress hadn't caused further damage. My body needed more time than I had hoped. But for the first time in months, my mind felt unburdened. One morning, Michael came with breakfast, a simple egg sandwich from the place near my old house. He didn't say much. He just unwrapped it, cut it in half, and placed the plate beside my bed. His hands still moved with the quiet grace of a son who had learned how to sit with a mother who didn't speak unless she meant to. I ate slowly, watching the sun shift across the blinds. When I was done, I looked at him and said, "It's time." He knew what I meant. 2 days later, I was discharged. Linda picked me up herself. She brought the old car she and I used to drive up the coast when we were both younger. It smelled the same, like vanilla and dust, and the faintest trace of peppermint gum. As we pulled away from the hospital, I didn't look back. There was nothing there I needed anymore. No weight, no memory that hadn't already been sorted through and laid to rest. We drove in silence until we reached the edge of town. She glanced at me once, then asked where to. I gave her an address, not my house, not Michael's. It was the local women's centre, a small building near the library painted blue and white. It was where women my age came when they had no one else to call. Widows, divorcees, survivors of long, invisible wars. They came for food, for guidance, for someone to say, "You still matter." I had been donating in small amounts for years, quietly, nothing anyone would write about. But this time was different. Inside the centre, I met with the director, a woman in her 50s named Carla, kind face, firm hands. She had heard what happened. She didn't bring it up. I handed her the folder myself. Inside were the papers finalizing the transfer of my remaining estate into a fund for women over 60 who needed legal support and transitional housing. It included the house Diana had once tried to claim, the vacation property she never knew I still owned, and the trust that now held the rest of the 2.2 million. I told Carla the name of the fund, the Helen Caraway Foundation for Dignity in Aging. She didn't say much, just reached across the desk and held my hand. Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden behind the centre. It wasn't big. A few benches, some overgrown rosemary and patches of lavender. But it was quiet, and it held peace the way certain places just do. Michael met me there. He brought Abigail. She had transferred to another unit, but she hadn't stopped checking in. She said watching what happened reminded her that no one is too old to fight back, that people still pay attention, that kindness matters, but so does truth. I looked at her and saw something I hadn't noticed before. She reminded me of myself, not when I was young, but in the middle years, when I was trying to hold a job, raise kids, keep a roof over our heads, and still have enough left in me to sit quietly at night and not cry. The years no one ever talks about, the ones that wear you thin and harden your smile. Before they left, she leaned in and whispered, "Thank you." I nodded. When the sun dropped lower, I stood up. My body still moved slower than before, but each step felt deliberate, measured, earned. Linda met me at the curb. She didn't say anything about the papers. She didn't ask what came next. She just opened the car door and waited. As we drove back, I looked out the window at the familiar roads. I thought about all the years I had given, thinking love was the only currency that mattered. I thought about how often I had forgiven in silence, hoping it would speak loud enough on its own. I thought about the meals I cooked, the checks I wrote, the apologies I never received. And I thought about the moment Diana put her hand on the oxygen line. She had already decided then who I was to her, just a step in the path towards something she thought she deserved. And now, she would have to carry that moment. Not me. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need the last word. I had chosen what to keep and what to leave behind. There's a kind of stillness that only comes after something breaks. It doesn't happen right away. At first there's noise, a crash, a storm of consequences. But eventually things settle. Not back to what they were, but into something else. Something quieter. And that's where I found myself. After the foundation was launched and the legal matters finalized, I moved into a smaller place on the edge of town. A modest one-story with a porch wide enough for 2 chairs. No stairs, no reminders. Just what I needed, and nothing more. I filled the space slowly. A photograph of my husband on the mantel. a cross-stitched pillow from years ago, though I never had the patience to finish more than one. A few worn cookbooks with pages folded where Michael used to mark his favorite dishes as a boy. No clutter, no shadows. Michael helped me with the move. Abigail brought over some houseplants and a basket of teas. Linda left a small note tucked into the silverware drawer that said, "You made it through." I kept that more than anything else. But the truth is, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Not in the way some people mean it. I wasn't giving up. I wasn't fading out. I was just closing the chapter that had gone on too long, the one where I kept waiting for something to change, for love to circle back, for old wrongs to suddenly make sense, for apology to knock on the door and mean it. Instead, I looked around and realized I didn't need any of it to move forward. I was already doing that. A few weeks after the move, I received a letter from a woman in another state. She had read about the foundation and wanted to thank me. Said she had spent the last 10 years feeling invisible after being pushed out of her own family home. Her children never called. Her name was never listed on anything. She didn't even have her own mailbox anymore. She ended the letter with one line I kept rereading. "You reminded me that I'm still mine." That stayed with me. It reminded me of a moment decades ago, long before Diana or Michael were born. I was 19, working nights in a factory, renting a room above a bar, and eating toast for dinner most nights. I had one drawer of clothes, one pair of shoes, and nothing in my name. But I remember sitting at that tiny kitchen table, writing my name on the back of an envelope, just so I could see it printed on something that belonged to me. Helen Caraway. It was barely ink on paper, but it was mine. Somewhere along the way, between diapers and overtime shifts and loan applications and hospital forms, my name got buried beneath everyone else's needs. That's what motherhood can be. A slow erasure you agree to without realizing what it costs. And by the time you notice, someone else is already signing your name like it belongs to them. But now, I had it back. Not just the name, but the story, the whole thing, written in court records and headlines and quiet conversations and signed trust papers, etched into the memory of every person who watched the news and said, "I won't let that happen to me." I never expected to be anyone's lesson. I never wanted that. But if that's what came of it, I could live with that. One morning, Michael brought over some paperwork. Not legal documents this time. Just forms for a speaking event the foundation had been invited to. A panel on elder care and financial autonomy. They wanted me to speak, to share what happened, to explain why I did what I did. I told him I would think about it. The truth is, I didn't know if I wanted to say it out loud. I had lived it. Every second, every breath. I didn't know if it needed to be spoken again, or if it was already loud enough on its own. But that night, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand, not signing anything, just writing. I wrote out names, dates, phrases that had stuck to my ribs like old bones. I wrote the moment I saw Diana's hand move toward the oxygen line. I wrote the look on Renee's face when she realized someone was watching. I wrote the sound of Michael's voice as he stood beside my hospital bed and said, "You're safe now." And then I wrote one final line at the bottom of the page. "This is not how my story ends." I folded the paper, slid it into a drawer, and poured myself a glass of water. Outside, the wind pushed against the side of the house. The porch creaked a little, the way wood does when it remembers weather. But inside it was calm, warm, held. No threats, no tension, just the sound of my own breath. Even, steady, mine. A few weeks after settling into the new place, I received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. His name was Reverend Cole. He had been the pastor at our family church for most of my adult life. I remembered the way his voice used to settle people in the pews. It wasn't loud or fiery, just steady, clear, like someone who had seen too much and learned when to let silence do the work. When my husband passed, Reverend Cole had spoken at the service. He had sat with me afterward in the empty sanctuary, while the flowers wilted under the heat of the stained glass windows. He didn't offer advice. He just listened. And somehow, that was the only thing I needed. After that, we lost touch. I moved across town. The church changed, new families came in, life got messy, and the space between people widened, as it often does. But that morning, his name came through on the caller ID, like an echo from another life. He said he had read the stories, not just the news reports, but the letters, the foundation updates, the speech I finally agreed to give last week at the community hall. I saw your name again, he said, and it made me remember who you were before all this. I invited him over the next day. He arrived in a brown coat, older than some of the trees outside. His hair had turned to silver, his back bent slightly with time, but his presence was unchanged. He still moved like a man who didn't need to command a room to own it. He brought a paper bag with 2 slices of banana bread and a folded newspaper. He said the bread was from a new widow in his congregation who insisted he share it. The paper, he admitted, he brought just out of habit. We sat on the porch. The breeze tugged gently at the wind chimes. No one rushed to fill the silence. Eventually, he looked at me. You always held yourself like someone who knew how to wait for the right moment, he said. I sipped my tea, then replied, I waited too long for some things, but I'm not waiting anymore. He nodded. That's why I came. He pulled something from the inside pocket of his coat. A letter, handwritten, addressed to him. The handwriting was familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but something about the way the letters curled at the edges stirred something in me. He laid it on my lap. It's from your daughter, he said. I looked at him, not in shock, not even in anger, just with a quiet question I didn't speak aloud. He answered anyway. She wrote to me 2 weeks ago, asked for guidance, not forgiveness, not advice, just a place to speak without being judged. I didn't touch the envelope. I just let it rest on my knees. He didn't push. We sat in the quiet again, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch floor. You don't owe her reconciliation, he said, but you deserve peace, and sometimes peace is found in understanding why people break the way they do. I listened. He didn't preach. He didn't quote scripture. He spoke like a man who had buried too many people with words left unsaid. He told me about a woman who had stolen from her sister after their father died, about a son who had forged his mother's name on a home loan, about the ways families can wound each other with precision because they know exactly where to strike. He didn't tell me to forgive. He didn't ask me to forget. He simply said this: you survived what was meant to end you. Now you get to decide what kind of silence you carry from here on out. That stayed with me. When he left, he didn't shake my hand. He placed it gently on my shoulder. Just once. Just enough. I sat there long after his car disappeared down the road. I didn't open the letter. Not that night. Not the next day, either. But I kept it on the table beside my bed. Not because I needed to read it, but because I needed to know I had the choice. For once, the decision belonged to me. And that, more than anything she could have written, was the beginning of my healing. The town didn't change overnight. The roads still cracked after the frost. The corner store still closed early on Sundays. The mail still came late, especially when it rained. But there was a shift. Small at first, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. It showed up in the way people greeted me, not out of pity, not with the polite eyes of someone avoiding discomfort. It was different. They looked straight at me, nodded with a kind of quiet acknowledgement. Some of them didn't say anything at all, but the silence was no longer avoidance. It was respect. It happened again at the grocery store. A woman about my age, maybe a few years older, stood behind me in line. She wore a faded red cardigan and carried one of those canvas totes with hand-stitched patches on the sides. When I turned to step forward, she touched my elbow gently. "I saw what you did with the fund," she said. "You made room for the rest of us." I didn't have a reply, just a nod. Later that week, Linda forwarded me an email. It was from a county in another state. Their community center wanted permission to model their new grant program after our foundation. They had read about it in a piece published by a non-profit magazine focused on aging with dignity. The article included my name, a photo I didn't know they had taken. Me, sitting in the sun outside the women's center. Not smiling, not frowning, just there. Real. I gave permission, of course, but I asked them to remove the picture. The story was enough. At the foundation's next board meeting, Carla said something that stayed with me. People are showing up differently now. She meant the clients, the women who walked through those doors with folders clutched to their chests, afraid of being turned away, ignored, or dismissed. They came in taller now, still scared, still unsure. But something had shifted. It was as if they had seen one of their own survive something they never thought survivable. And that survival had become permission. The foundation saw a spike in applications that month, not just for financial help, but for volunteer work. Women who had been silent for years stepped forward. Some offered to teach basic finance. Others wanted to start support groups for legal navigation, medical advocacy, or estate planning. They didn't want to just receive. They wanted to participate. That was what healing looked like. Not a single moment of triumph, but a slow, stubborn return to dignity. At the next community dinner, I sat beside a woman named Lorraine. She had just turned 70 and had spent the last 10 years living with her youngest son and his family. She told me, without flinching, that she had recently moved out after realizing she wasn't wanted there anymore. Not with words, but with the way they left her name off the mailbox, with the way they asked her to eat in the kitchen while guests took her seat at the table. She said she used to think she didn't have anywhere to go. Then she saw the headline. Then she walked into the foundation office and was handed a rental application and a key. She didn't cry when she told me. Neither did I. We just sat there, two women who had once been made small by the people they loved most, now speaking to each other like equals. That night, after I returned home, I sat on the porch for a long time. The stars were out, not bright, but enough. The wind carried the sound of dry leaves scraping across pavement. A soft, steady rhythm that reminded me of everything I had lived through, everything I had left behind. I thought about the letter still in my drawer, still unopened, still untouched. I thought about Reverend Cole's words, about the silence we carry, about the ones we choose. I had made my choice. But it no longer sat heavy in me. It didn't eat at my nights or steal from my mornings. It was just there, part of the landscape now, like the oak tree near the sidewalk. Big, quiet, unmoving. The community didn't change because of what happened to me. It changed because I chose to speak when I had been expected to stay quiet. Because I chose not to shrink. And because once I stood, Others realized they could too. That is what they never expected, not just my survival, but my insistence that it meant something. The first time I stood in front of a group and spoke into a microphone again, it wasn't planned. Carla had asked me to attend the monthly gathering at the community centre. She said some of the new residents wanted to meet me, but she didn't say anything about speaking. I wore a navy cardigan and slacks, nothing formal, just something comfortable that didn't draw attention. The chairs were already filled when I arrived. The room was warm, not from temperature, but from presence. Older women sat next to younger ones, some with their hands folded tightly in their laps, others with arms crossed over guarded hearts. No one looked at their phones. No one looked away. They were waiting for something real. Carla welcomed them with a short introduction. Then she turned to me. She said only this: "Helen, would you like to say something?" I didn't prepare. I didn't carry notes or outlines or rehearsed phrases. I simply stood. I looked at the faces in front of me. Then I spoke the truth. I said I knew what it was to be betrayed in the quiet. Not the kind of betrayal you can point to, but the kind that grows over years. I said I understood the exhaustion of giving and never hearing thank you. I said I didn't have answers, but I had questions that took me a lifetime to ask. And I said this: there is no shame in starting over. The room stayed still, and that was enough. Afterward, a young woman named Mel approached me. She couldn't have been older than 30. She wore worn sneakers and had dark circles under her eyes that looked like they hadn't faded in years. She told me her mother had been silenced by a family who said she was difficult, dramatic, and ungrateful. Her mother passed away with no estate, no recognition, and no voice. Mel said she didn't want the same for herself. She asked how I had known when it was time to speak up. I told her I didn't know. I just knew it hurt more to stay quiet. She nodded once, then left. That night, I walked home alone. The wind had picked up. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk in little dances. The streetlights cast long, trembling shadows. And I realized something I hadn't named before. For the first time in my life, I trusted my own footsteps. It's a strange thing to admit, that even after decades of motherhood, marriage, work, and sacrifice, I still hadn't fully trusted myself. I trusted others to define me. I trusted their versions of me more than my own. The good daughter, the responsible wife, the steady employee, the quiet mother. But I never trusted the part of me that said no, or the part that said enough, or the part that questioned if silence was really love. Now that voice was louder, not angry, just certain. A few days later, Michael visited with his youngest. Her name was June. She was 6, with a lopsided braid and a front tooth missing. She carried a picture she had drawn in school. It was a house with a big tree, a swing, and a woman with grey hair standing in the doorway. She told me it was me. I looked at Michael. He said June had heard parts of my story from her mother. They hadn't hidden it. They told her the truth in pieces small enough for her to carry. I asked June what she wanted to be when she grew up. She said brave. Not rich, not pretty, not famous, just brave. She didn't say it to please me. She said it like she already believed it. Later that afternoon, Michael asked if I had plans for the fall. I told him I was thinking of teaching again, not at a university or school, just informal workshops at the centre, estate planning, financial literacy, legal advocacy, things no one teaches women until it's too late. He smiled. Then he asked if I felt like myself again. I thought about that for a long time after he left. The truth is, I didn't feel like the old me. I felt like someone new, someone rebuilt, not restored. There was a time when I measured myself by what I had given, how much I could absorb, how much I could endure without falling apart. Now I measured myself by what I protected, what I preserved, what I reclaimed. I had trusted people who used my silence as a path to power. Now I trusted myself enough to never let that happen again. That was the gift, not the foundation, not the recognition, but the quiet knowledge that I belonged to myself again, and no one could sign that away. That fall, the trees turned early. The leaves outside my window curled into shades of rust and amber before the first cold snap. Every morning I sat with a blanket over my knees and a mug in my hands, watching the same breeze scatter the season across the lawn. I let it pass without rushing it. The work at the foundation continued. Carla kept me updated, but I took a step back. Not because I was tired, not because I wanted out. I just knew the story was moving forward now, even without me at the center of it. I had passed the torch without ceremony, and somehow that felt more honest than a speech. Linda stopped by once a week. She brought news from her end of town, pie from the co-op bakery, and the same wry smile she'd carried since we were both 20-something women with opinions no one wanted to hear. We didn't need to talk much. Our silences had their own language by now. She stayed an hour or two, then left without dragging out the goodbye. Michael came by on Sundays. June sometimes brought drawings, sometimes brought her own small questions, the kind that don't always need answers. She sat next to me on the porch one afternoon and leaned her head against my arm. We didn't speak, but that touch, quiet and steady, carried more than any apology ever could. The rhythm of my days settled into something I hadn't known I needed. Peace, but not the kind that comes from things being over. It was the peace of knowing I had come out the other side without needing to prove anything anymore. And yet, there were nights when the quiet stretched too far. One of those nights, I had a dream. In it, I stood in my old kitchen, the one from the house I raised my children in. The wallpaper was still peeling in the corners. The stove hummed low, just like it used to when I left the oven on for warmth. But the room was empty. No clutter, no voices, no smells of stew or coffee or cinnamon toast. Just me. And across from me, a chair, not facing me, just sitting there. In the dream, I knew someone had just left. The cup on the table still steamed, the cushion still held an impression. But they were gone, not out of malice, not with rage, just gone. When I woke up, the house was still. No ticking clocks, no cars outside, only the hush of the walls breathing with me. It didn't feel like sadness, it felt like the beginning of letting go. That morning, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the envelope Reverend Cole had handed me weeks ago. Diana's letter, still sealed, still untouched. I held it in my hands for a long time. Then I set it back down. I didn't need to read it. There was a time I thought closure had to be earned by finishing every sentence, by hearing every excuse, by revisiting every moment. But that time had passed. What I had now was not closure. It was clarity. And it didn't come from understanding her. It came from understanding me. I had given enough of my breath to things that didn't breathe life back into me. So I stood, slowly, letting my legs warm beneath me. I folded a shawl across my shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. The morning light was soft, not fully awake yet, like a child stretching before the day. I sat in my chair, closed my eyes, listened to the breeze move through the trees, and let everything else pass. The winter that followed came early and quiet. Frost lined the porch railing before Thanksgiving. Michael offered to install a new heater, but I told him not to worry. The small one I had worked just fine. I liked the way it hummed, like an old friend still trying its best. I didn't need much, just warmth, a cup of tea, and the quiet company of my own thoughts. The days shortened, the light slipped in slower and left faster. But I didn't feel the usual loneliness that creeps in when the shadows come too soon. I had learned to live in the soft hours, to trust them. That December, the community centre held a small gathering. They called it a celebration, but it was really something gentler than that. Just women from different walks of life sharing soup, folding donated blankets, and passing stories like small gifts no one asked for, but everyone needed. I sat near the window, watching June colour on the floor while Carla read aloud from a local paper. The foundation had been listed in a year-end feature as one of the most impactful new programs for elder justice. The photo accompanying the article was one I had finally agreed to. A side profile. Soft light. Me holding a folder, eyes forward. I didn't recognize myself at first. Not because of how I looked, but because I no longer saw the woman who waited for permission to take up space. After the event, I walked home slowly. The sidewalk glittered faintly with leftover frost. Each step left a print that would fade before morning, and I thought to myself, that's enough. Not every mark has to last to matter. Back in my kitchen, I pulled out a small notebook. I wrote one last entry. Not a letter, not a statement, just a line. I leave behind this version of me, not in anger, but in peace. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I knew it was mine. A week later, I prepared a small box for June. Inside was my mother's silver locket, a photograph of her as a child, and a note written in even strokes. Be brave, but also be soft. Your strength is not in what you carry, but in what you choose to let go of. That was the last thing I wrote, because sometimes the most important part of any story is knowing when to stop speaking and simply let it breathe. What I leave behind isn't just money. It isn't just property or paper. It's a path, lit by every moment I thought I wouldn't survive and still did. And now, it belongs to someone else. If this story reminded you of a moment when you had to stand alone or find your voice after being silenced, you're not alone. Healing does not always look like justice, but it often begins when we tell the truth. If you know someone who needs to hear this, feel free to share it. And if you've ever been made to feel small in your own story, I hope this reminded you that you still hold the pen. Thank you for spending time with me. Until next time, be kind to yourself. You deserve it.